Hello, everybody. Welcome, distinguished panelists and audience members. I know many of us have traveled very far to be here, and it is truly an honor to be here. I want to thank certainly Dasha Kamara and all of the G&H work that has been going on for so many years now, really pioneering an idea whose time clearly has come. But I think Dasha Kamara was a bit remiss in not announcing the medical treatment a little earlier. I've come with a sinus infection. I could have definitely benefited from some traditional medicine at the beginning of the conference, not at the end. Nevertheless, here I am, and we'll definitely make a visit to the tent. I think this title, it really encompasses spirituality. The title of our panel is appropriately broad. It's not about, in my case, economics of any particular religious persuasion, although we are looking at what Buddhism might be able to contribute to a much larger dialogue about the global economy. And I've noticed in sitting through many of the panel discussions, many of the participants really are coming here from a ground-up perspective, looking at how change can be initiated locally and sustainably. But there is also a larger component, really the global economic system that we are now looking at today. And it has become a system that, ironically, many people have benefited. If you look at the hundreds of millions of people who have emerged from absolute poverty, it's quite impressive. But this is a genie who has sort of two sides. And we have also seen, and I think here, I will not have to spend much time discussing this because so many other people have discussed already, the unsustainability of the global economic system. It has led us to a point today, a tipping point, where we really cannot continue with this idea of consumption and even more consumption. And I think there is one slide that really captures this very well. When we look at, historically, the growth in GDP, oops, let's see if I can get to the right slide. Oops, it seems to have died. Okay, here we go. Okay, that slide, if you can see it. Really, what's happened, the world since the Industrial Revolution, kind of bumping along. By the early 20th century, we were looking at global GDP and, well under $2 trillion, really far under, more like about $1.3 trillion. And then suddenly you start to see this acceleration. And that acceleration is also matched by, at the same time period, a dramatic population increase globally. Where we went from a population of about 1 billion people to now, over 7 billion. And it's interesting because one could make the case that perhaps a consumption-driven economy could work if there's a smaller number of people who are consuming. But when you have a consumption-based economy and an increasing population, it's not sustainable. And we've now reached a point that clearly it is not sustainable. And we've also reached a point, I think scientists refer to this as a new geological era, because for the last 12,000 years, climate has been pretty stable. And we have, as civilizations, we have benefited from a relatively stable and benign period. But that is now changing. I mean, we now have human beings are able to alter not just climate, but the entire structure of this planet. We are the only species ever to have reached this point. But I don't think we've reached this point with a great deal of wisdom. Certainly a lot of technology and a lot of capacity, but who we are, I think, as human beings really we have not reached the point where we can live in a sustainable way with the planet. And this really comes to the topic of the spirituality. And spirituality isn't just about religion. It's really about a relationship. And I want to, there's one word in Buddhism that really captures a lot of this. It's pratitya samutapida, which is, we translate as dependent arising. It's a way of saying interdependence or interconnectivity. And this is one of the primary messages, I think, that Buddhism really can contribute to a discourse about sustainability. Just to back up a moment, I'm not an economist. I have a PhD in political science. Of course, I've been exposed to economics, but I wouldn't consider myself to be a particularly strong economist. But I'm now spending quite a bit of time in Bangkok. There's an organization in Bangkok that I've become affiliated with. This is this international network of engaged Buddhists. It's really not much of an organization. It is a network, and it's done amazing work at a grassroots level for the past pretty much 30 years, building infrastructures, building capacity. For example, in Burma, much of the progress that has been achieved in the NGO world in Burma has been through the grassroots work of this organization. And recently, they wish to establish a working group that would see what Buddhist economics would be able to contribute globally to the discourse about reforming the global, both environment and the economic system. And somehow I was drafted into becoming the convener of this working group. But I was a reluctant draftee because, frankly, I didn't know whether there was such a thing as Buddhist economics. I mean, what is Buddhist economics? And I've done a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of talking to some very distinguished people to try to become comfortable with the idea that there is such a thing as Buddhist economics. And I find that Buddhism intersects with the global economy in two ways. First, in terms of ethics. Because ethics is really a core component of Buddhism. And Buddhism has much to say about right living and ethics. But the other area, I think, which I see particularly because my background in Buddhist studies is more from the Vajrayana side, but I think it really comes down to this question of interdependence. We have an economic system today that is based, as we all know, on consumption. And we become almost commodity-like as people. We are consumers. But the actual relationship in Buddhist terms is much deeper than this. I mean, the interdependence that exists is so fundamental that there is no separation. And once we begin to understand that a zero-sum game isn't really going to work to reform the economy, because at the base of all this, if we start to reform the global economy, but we don't really understand our relationship with the world we live in, then we run into this fundamental problem that the approach that we're taking is going to be flawed. Because essentially, consumption comes from a fundamental misunderstanding about who we are and what our relationship is with the world. And with that, I just want to turn quickly. How are we doing on time? Okay. Going back to the very beginning of this slide. Sorry, just 1 second. So, fortunately, I don't need to talk about the global wealth inequality, the environmental impact that we've been having, because we've heard this throughout these sessions. And this was really the first part of the paper that I had written, really examining the economic case, which I think has been made very strongly. But the Buddhist response is really, we remain captive of an imaginary construct, which sometimes we call the ego. And we are disconnected from an innate state of balance, harmony, really a deep and fundamental connectivity. So it's the Buddhist understanding of nature of mind and interdependence. Remember that word, pratitya samutapida, this interdependence that offers profound insights to the survival of the human species and all of the other sentient beings that we have now the capacity to alter. I know many of you read about mass extinction events that happen to other species. We have a direct role. So the Buddha spoke about economic activity, didn't call it economics, but often in the context of ethics, and paved the way for contemporary Buddhist scholars to reframe economics in terms of societal needs, the right living, balanced sustainability. In Buddhism, we talk about kleshas, these poisons or afflictions. And these are the primary causes that keep us going round and round and round in samsara. And this is an ignorance, a confusion, which is the most fundamental and the most pervasive of these poisons. And the attachment and greed and aversion. So you have attachment, aversion, and we swing between these, which creates a lot of the dynamic we see in the global economic system. These can be offset through prajna, or wisdom, or dana, or generosity, and metta, loving kindness, which contributes to a completely different framework, a different way of approaching the economy. And in Buddhist economic thinking, the failure of this growth and consumption-driven global economic system is the product of these three kleshas, these three poisons. And an economy founded on the prajna, on dana, on metta, loving kindness, this is what's going to lead us to sustainability, balance, and harmony, and connection. The INEB, the International Network for Engaged Buddhists, has begun looking at secular policy prescriptions based on this core Buddhist understanding. Because it's not enough to have a Buddhist terminology and expect really for this to have much impact. These are secular issues. The intersection of the global economy and sustainability and any policy prescriptions have to be framed in secular terms. So the challenge really is to look at Buddhist prescriptions and to orient them in a secular direction so that they can be well understood. The working group that we've established now includes, and it is growing to include even more well-known economists, environmentalists, academics in other scientific disciplines, and policymakers, etc. We are continuing to reach out to like-minded individuals and organizations. We're organizing a series of discussions, and we certainly very much hope to be working within the G&H framework and the G&H community, particularly in Bhutan. And this is something that I invite all of you to contact me about if you have a continued interest. there's no ownership here. I think that for a successful implementation of core Buddhist ideas into reforming the global economy, we need really the collective wisdom that you bring to this. So it's really an invitation at a very early stage to join with us and look at ways that we can really influence in a very positive way a global dialogue, and to look at the core Buddhist ideas that could perhaps help to bring about a much more sustainable world and a sustainable economy, which will then contribute to a sustainable environment. With that, I'm going to close, and also with my apology that I do need to leave. Unfortunately, I cannot stay to the end because I have another pressing engagement. So if there are any questions, the chairman has kindly agreed to give us a moment or two, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we can move on to the next presentation. So thank you.